So far, we have learned three different methods of factoring. We learned three methods of factoring. Got the greatest common factor, grouping, and MAF. Greatest common factor, you can use that anytime. Anytime, anywhere, any place. If there's a number you can divide out, if there are variables that you can take out, then you can do greatest common factor. Anytime, anywhere, any place. Grouping is using the GCF, but you can only use it with 4 terms. You have to have 4 terms to do grouping. MAF, multiply, add, factor. That's when you're finding two numbers that multiply to this and add to this. 3 terms. You need 3 terms to do that. You need 3 terms to do that. So, ever since we've gotten back from spring break, we've been factoring. We spent a lot of time with factoring. The purpose of factoring is to be able to break down a problem so that it's easier to solve an equation. That's the purpose of factoring. To break down a problem to make it easier to solve an equation. So, look at it this way. If I gave you 4x equals 0, you could probably solve that pretty easily. If I gave you that equation, you could solve that very easily. If I gave you that equation, you could solve that very easily. Is there anyone that would struggle with solving any of those 3 equations? Either of those 3. Either in the class or at home remotely. No? Pretty simple? So, these are simple equations. However, when you have an equation like that, well, I don't know if I know how to do that. And if that's how you're feeling, that's okay. And so, well, I don't know if I can be able to solve that. And that's okay if your answer is I don't know. At least right now. If we know how to factor, then we can solve equations like this. So that's what we're going to do. If you can factor, then we can solve equations like that. But we need a rule to allow us to do that. So this rule is called the zero product property. Zero product property. So let's think back to elementary school. If you multiply anything times 0, what do you get? 0. Anything times 0 is 0. Point blank, period. So you get 2 things. Let me use my highlighter. Because for those people who are at home, they should know anything that's highlighted should be in their notes. You don't have that problem. Y'all copy your notes. Yeah, you. Zero product property. If you have 2 things being multiplied together and they're equal to 0. So A times B equals 0. That means either A has to equal 0, B has to equal 0, or both of them have to equal 0. So one, the other, or both. One, the other, or both. So this is how this property works. It's actually very, very easy. Very, very simple property. Make this a little bit bigger. You have x plus 3 and 2x minus 1 equals 0. So I want you to notice how this problem is set up. 2 things I want you to notice. First thing, the equation is equal to 0. And the equation is already factored. The equation is equal to 0, and the equation is already factored. So if the equation is equal to 0 and the equation is already factored, this is what you get to do. You get to break the problem apart. Take the problem, break it apart. You take each part of the problem and set it equal to 0. So x plus 3 equals 0, or 2x minus 1 equals 0. And I can guarantee you, everyone in this classroom and everyone at home can solve those two equations. These two itty-bitty equations. X plus 3 equals 0. Got 3 on both sides. Two x minus 1 equals 0. Add 1. Divide by 2. I can absolutely guarantee you can solve those out. Guarantee. So, yeah, absolutely. So, if the equation is equal to 0, and if the equation is already factored, you can break the problem apart and solve the two itty-bitty equations. Just that simple. Just that simple. So, any questions with that first example? Any questions with that first example? Again, those of you who are at home, look, you're at home. So that means you got to make sure you come off of mute or type in the chat what your question is. The 3, 6, 8, 11, 12 people in here, I'm directly looking at them. They can directly ask me, Mr. Lowe, such and such and such and such. It's much easier for me to get to them. So if you have a question, make sure you speak up and ask. That's simple. That's it. X equals negative 3. I can't go any farther than that. X equals 1/2. I can't go any farther than that. So that's your answer unless the directions told you to do something different. Like add the two answers up. Find the sum of the answers, or find the product of the answers, or something along those lines. But other than that, what you see is what you get. So, excellent question. Anyone else with questions? Any questions in here? Some of you all who are on your phones in here, you got all day to be focused on your phone. Focus on the math up in here. That way you're not lost, you're not confused, things of that nature. Yeah, it's different being in the classroom than it is being at home. Might as well get used to it now. You're going to be back in the building next year. All right, so examples 1, 2, and 3. We're going to do 1 and 2 together. You're going to do 3 by yourself. So let's do 1 and 2 together before you do 3 by yourself. So example 1. 4x parentheses 5x minus 3 equals 0. Now, those of you who are using your phone as a calculator, it's okay to use your phone as a calculator. So if you need to use your phone as a calculator, do it. I'm talking about the, let's scroll Snapchat, Facebook, Instagram, all that stuff. You got it. I want to do the same thing, but I can't. It doesn't work. So, you have 4x parentheses 5x minus 3 equals 0. So remember, the equation has to be equal to 0. The equation has to already be factored. before I can split it apart. So is it equal to 0? Absolutely. Is it already factored? Absolutely. So that means I can split it apart. So 4x equals 0, or 5x minus 3 equals 0. Split it apart. Now, if you put one on top, one on the bottom, that's okay. Don't feel like you have to rewrite it. What you don't do not multiply those two together. You're making the problem harder on yourself if you do that. If you did it that way, well, they have erasers on pencils. So now we solve the problem now. So 4x equals 0 is 4 times x equals 0. What do I do with the 4? What? So x equals 0. That was simple enough. Second equation. What do I do first? Somebody said it. Add 3. Add 3 to both sides. And what? Divide by 5. So x equals 3/5. Mr. Lowe, I got a fraction. So, Mr. Lowe, I got a decimal. And you got a fraction, you got a decimal. Those are numbers too. But just as Amari just asked, once you solve the two equations, the problem is over. You're done. Problem's finished. It's already factored. It's already equal to 0. And all you have to do is solve the equation. Split it up and solve it. Any questions before we do example 2? Alright, let's do example 2. Same rules apply. Is this equal to 0? Is it already factored? Already factored. Equal to 0. Split it apart. You don't have to put the word or in between, I don't care. So there's our two equations. How do we solve the first equation? Add 3. X equals 3. Again, those of you that are inside the classroom, if you get stuck anywhere, you definitely better not keep your mouth shut. You're in the classroom. You have direct access to the person who is teaching the class. Ask the question. What's the worst thing that can happen? Like I said, same rule applies with remote 1 and 2. Anyone who tries to come at your head for asking a question, I'm going to come at theirs, and they ain't ready for this life. How you first solve the second equation? And 7 on both sides. Go ahead. Speak up, speak up, speak up. Oh, you haven't looked at the second page yet then. Of course we are. Like, I can't expect you to know how to solve it when they're not factored if you can't solve it when they already are. Baby steps. Take some baby steps in that here. Questions on 1 or 2? Naomi, you straight? I know you straight? Claudia, you straight? Right, you okay? Okay. So we're gonna start. We'll start example 3 together. You'll finish it. So is it equal to 0? Is it already factored? How many parts do you see? 3. 3. Okay. So you have 3 parts. That just means you're gonna have 3 equations, and that means you're gonna have 3 answers. So take the next minute. So pop that back on. So let's pick up from where we left off. What's one of the 3 equations? 5x equals
0.
0. So x is equal to what? 0. Divide both sides by 5. Here's one answer. What's the next equation? 2x plus 3 equals 0. What do? Subtract 3. So 2x equals negative 3. And divide by 2. X equals negative 3 over 2. There's 2 answers. So x minus 5 equals 0 is the last one. Add 5 to both sides. That wasn't that bad. That wasn't that hard. I've done harder stuff in this class. I've done harder stuff in this class. This is like it. Any questions, examples 1, 2, or 3? Especially for my folks at home. Any questions 1, 2, or 3? All right, so the question was asked, is it always going to be factored for you? The answer is no. So, what do we do if it's not factored? It didn't do us that solid. How do we solve it? So there's 4 things we have to do if it's not done for us. These steps go pretty quickly depending on how well you know how to factor and how well you know how to solve an equation. So it might take Landon less time than it does Kalani, and that's okay. The steps are still the same. First step is to rewrite the equation so that it equals 0. So I'm going to go through example 1 step by step. So all you need to do is follow along and, of course, copy the example. So step 1, rewrite the equation so that it's equal to 0. It's already equal to 0. So nothing we need to do there. Step 2, factor the expression. So remember, there are 3 ways that you can factor. There's GCF, which you can do anytime, anywhere, any place. MAF, which is 3 terms. And grouping is 4 terms. So we're going to factor this expression. 4x squared minus 28x. When we factor, we ignore the 0. When we factor, we ignore the 0. So we're going to do GCF because we can do it anytime, anywhere, any place. You have a 4 and you have a 28. That's the biggest number you can divide out. 4. Do they have the same variable? Yes. Yeah. We just need to know, do they have the same variable? They don't have to have the same exponents. They just have to have the same variables. So your greatest common factor, 4 times x, 4x. So we've been doing greatest common factor for about 2 weeks. Most of you, by now, because I've looked at your homework, seen your quizzes, and all the other stuff, have a pretty good grasp of this. If you have a good grasp of that, then you don't need to keep writing these 3 parts out. This is how you tell me the greatest common factor. Because the greatest common factor, you have to do what with it? What do you do with it? You divide it. So instead of writing these 3 things out, if you know what you're doing, just show me that you're dividing out 4x. If you know what you're doing, just show me that. If you need to keep writing this out because you need it, then keep doing it. I'm never going to penalize you for doing more work. I'm going to penalize you if you don't show me enough. You know, pretty much been teaching you all since August. Most of you all since August. I have a pretty good idea of what some of your strengths and weaknesses are. So, divide by 4x. So 4x is your greatest common factor. 4 divided by 4 is 1. X squared divided by x is x. 28 divided by 4 is 7. And the x is canceled out. So now it's factored. Now it's factored. Any questions before we continue? If you stuck somewhere, if you don't understand where something came from, this is when you ask. And if you're in class, don't walk up out of here not knowing what you're doing. If you're at home, don't end up signing off in 18 minutes not knowing what you're doing. Always make sure you know what you're doing. You good or not? Okay. So, inside the parentheses, can I use MAF? Can I use MAF on this? No. Why not? There's only 2 terms. How many terms do you need? 3. It's 2 terms. You need 3. So you can't do MAF unless you have 3 terms. So this is factored. We're done with step number 2. So now example 1 looks no different than that problem right there. That problem looks no different. So that means we can now do the exact same thing that we did. Take the 2 parts, bring them up. Divide by 4, x equals 0. Add 7, x equals 7. There's your 2 answers. So there's your 2 answers. Yeah, it's not a hard problem. We just got to put in some work. Not a hard problem, it's some work. Any questions on example 1? You okay, Shimon? I'll give you a headache. You are, if I am, that's fine. My brother tells me I give him a headache every single day. Right. So do the same thing with example 2. So example 2, we go through the same 4 steps. Rewrite the equation so that it equals 0. Is it equal to 0?
Yes.
Then we don't have to do step 1. Step 2, factor it. How many parts are on the left-hand side? 3. So this is going to be an MAF problem. But before we do MAF, we have to check greatest common factor. Why? Because you can do it anytime, anywhere, any place. So you have a 1, an 11, and a 30. What's the biggest number you can divide out? 1. Oh, look at that. Well, some people remember what I said about if any of those numbers is a 1, then your biggest number is 1. If any of those 3 numbers is a 1, your greatest common factor is 1. Can you take out a variable? No. What's missing it? 30 is missing it. So no variable. Your greatest common factor is 1. And since your greatest common factor is 1, you can go right to MAF. So again, those people who are real good with GCF can skip that part because they already see what's going to happen. If they're good about their game, they can skip that part. If you're a little hesitant, do it. It ain't going to kill you. So let's do MAF. So remember, M is your last part. That's the 30. A is your middle. That's 11. Oops. A is your middle. That's 11. So we need 2 numbers that multiply to 30 and add to 11. Multiply to 30, add to 11. So, what we got here? 5 and 6. 5 and 6. Anyone struggle getting 5 and 6? Speak now or keep your peace. Remember, you got to know how to factor. You got to know how to multiply. If you finessed it in 8th grade, 7th grade, too bad. You can't finesse high school. You have to know how to multiply. So, take your problem, break it into 2 parts, break it into 2 parentheses. X squared becomes x and x. One of the parentheses gets a 5, one of the parentheses gets a 6. So we just finished step number 2. Yeah, problem's taking so long because I have to explain it to 21 people. Trenton probably already finished this problem. Brooklyn probably already finished this problem. I'm just slow dragging. Any questions before we continue? So the equation is equal to 0. It's factored. Now we can break it apart. Now we can break the problem apart. So x plus 5. What do we need to do to get x by itself? Subtract 5. So x equals -5. What about the second equation? Subtract 6. That's it. Problem's over. That wasn't hard. That wasn't bad. Any question examples 1 and 2? 1 or 2. Put them both on the screen real quick. Got one more example that we'll do together. And of course, 4, 5, and 6. 4, 5, and 6 we'll do on
Friday.
Friday. All right. So, problem 3. So, of course, problem 3, Mr. Lowe, is going to be a little extra. Why? Because what do you notice? What do you notice about number 3? It is not equal to 0. So, Mr. Lowe decided to be a little extra, and that's not equal to 0. Okay. So, if it's not equal to 0, we need to force this to equal to 0. We're not going to force the problem to equal 0. So, if you have 40 and you want to make it 0, what do you do to the 40? So I heard subtract, and I heard someone say divide. One of those two is right. So, if I take 40 and divide by 40, what's that? 1. Is 1 equal to 0? No. So I can't do that. If I do 40 minus 40, what's that? That's 0. So I'm going to have to subtract 40. But if I subtract 40 on the right, you got to subtract it on the left too. So you're going to subtract 40 on both sides of the equation. So I know Io likes to draw the line in between her equation like that. She just has to make sure that that minus 40 is on both sides. So you have y squared minus 6y minus 40 equals 0. That's step 1. So, to make it equal 0, you take the opposite. To make it equal 0, you take the opposite. If this is positive, you subtract. If this is negative, you add. That's simple. That's step 1. Now we're going to factor. So, 3 terms means what? MAF. Before we do MAF, we 37 factor. What's the biggest number? The biggest number is 1. Does it have the same variable? No. So your GCF is 1. So if your GCF is 1, you can skip and go to MAF. You can move a little bit faster if you know what you're doing. Of course, if you need that additional second, speak up and say so. Because I can't read your mind. Otherwise, I play louder tonight. MAF. Your last term was negative 40. The middle term was negative 6. So we need 2 numbers that multiply to negative 40 and add up to negative 6. Negative 10 and 4. Negative 10 and 4. So, negative 10 times 4 is negative 40. Negative 10 plus 4 is negative 6. That's your winning combination. That's your winning combination. So you open your parentheses. Y squared is y and y. One of your parentheses gets a negative 10. One of your parentheses gets a positive 4. So we're done with step 2. Any questions with step number 2? Any questions with step number 2? that's already very satisfactory. You can divide that with 3. So we're halfway done with the problem. Halfway through. Is that you okay? The equation is equal to 0. The equation is factored. It's 0 equal to 0 and it's factored. What am I allowed to do now?
We'll add, when you add plus 10 and
Before you do that. I mean, you're right, but before you do that, break it apart. But what you said is absolutely correct. Y minus 10 equals 0, y plus 4. Then what you said is absolutely right. So repeat what you said.
oh, you would add plus 10 and then you would subtract 4.
So you add 10 to one of them. You subtract 4 together. That's it. Problem over. Was anybody expecting that problem to be harder than what that was? See, at least Landon was honest. I can appreciate that. If you thought it was going to be harder, it's okay. Ain't nothing wrong with that. If you thought it was going to be harder, you thought it was going to be harder. Ain't nothing wrong with that. All right. So in a second, I'm going to post the link that people will need to upload their notes. Those of you who are in here, make sure you leave your notes out because I got to take a picture of them. So you don't have to upload your notes because I'm taking a picture of them. You don't need me to check them because I'm about to do it right now. And 4, 5, and 6, we will take care of Friday.